In an abandoned subterranean greenhouse in the Kyoto Gardens, Aiko discovered a 1927 notebook filled with illustrations of genetically modified flowers. The humid air exuded a sweet perfume of fossilized petals, and workbenches held glass jars with murky liquids and faded kanji labels. As she flipped through the yellowed pages, she noticed coded notes beside faded ink sketches of DNA diagrams. One diagram detailed grafts on roots, another showed flowers with luminous spores. In the corner of a page, a Latin phrase, sic in caelo, ita in terra. An elderly gardener, Kai, with dirt-stained cotton gloves, pointed to a false wall behind a centuries-old bonsai. Inside, sealed envelopes contained seeds labeled with the names of scientists who had disappeared after the Treaty of Versailles, and a map marked forbidden cultivation sites in Imperial Japan. Aiko took an envelope with Dr. Kuroda's name and a red crescent moon stamp. Kai explained that the flowers were part of an abandoned project to purify the nation's soul, but his voice faltered when mentioning experiments with lunar radiation. That night, Aiko planted one of the seeds in a cracked ceramic pot. Under the light of a lantern, she saw roots sprout within minutes, snaking like blue veins. At dawn, the first petals emerged, translucent and pulsating. Kai watched silently, then quoted a proverb about flowers born from ashes. When the flower completed its cycle in 12 hours, Aiko noticed its shadow projected patterns similar to the hidden map. 2 days later, an agricultural ministry official, wearing a golden flower brooch, visited the greenhouse. He inquired about unusual activities. Kai evaded the question, but that night revealed that the envelopes contained more than seeds. They were contracts signed in blood, binding the scientists to a secret society. Aiko insisted on deciphering the notebook's code and found references to a lunar formation visible only from Mount Fuji at 30-year intervals. On the eve of the marked date, they climbed the mountain under a thick fog. At the summit, Aiko placed the map on a stone and aligned the points with distant rock formations. The moon emerged from the clouds, revealing elongated shadows that formed a pattern identical to the planted flower's petals. Kai murmured something about a mirror between worlds, while Aiko recorded everything on video. When they played back the footage, they noticed the recorded shadows didn't match the real ones. Back in the greenhouse, the flowers had multiplied, covering the floor like a bioluminescent carpet. Aiko realized each plant reflected a different lunar phase, even under artificial light. Kai suggested destroying them, fearing consequences, but she argued that the lunar formation was a message, not a threat. As they argued, one of the ancient jars on the workbench shattered, releasing a silvery vapor that crystallized the air. The next morning, the ministry blocked access to the gardens. Aiko received an anonymous letter with a train ticket to Hokkaido and a faded photo of Dr. Kuroda beside a greenhouse identical to Kyoto's. Kai vanished, leaving only his soiled gloves on the bonsai. Before leaving, Aiko buried the notebook and remaining seeds beneath an oak tree at the garden's edge, where blue veins already showed beneath the earth. In Hokkaido, the train stopped at an abandoned station. On the horizon, a field of glowing flowers shimmered beneath the snow, forming the same pattern as the lunar formation. A man with a golden flower brooch waited on the platform, holding an envelope with Aiko's name written in ancient kanji. Aiko stepped off the train in Hokkaido, the thick paper of the envelope pressed against her chest, still smelling of engine oil and thyme. The man with the golden flower brooch had vanished, leaving only boot prints in the snow leading to the glowing field. Each flower there was larger than those in Kyoto, with translucent petals like blown glass, emitting a low hum that vibrated the air. She walked to the center of the field, where a shattered glass greenhouse housed a hidden laboratory. Inside, stainless steel benches held hundreds of test tubes with greenish liquid, and an antique microscope had a slide marked Sample 12B, Karen Phase 3. On a wall, someone had scribbled equations about photosynthesis, and a drawing of the formation seen from Mount Fuji now connected to coordinates in Nagasaki, Osaka, and Okinawa. An open journal on the table mentioned human testing and synchronization within 186-year cycle, a date coinciding with the next alignment of the formation. Kenji, a botanist with burn scars on his hands, emerged from the fog carrying an ultraviolet flashlight. "They are not plants," he said, pointing the beam at a flower that projected holograms of equations into the air. "They are antennae." Someone had tried using lunar radiation for communication, but the flowers had evolved. He opened a freezer. Dozens of frozen seeds pulsed in rhythm with Aiko's heartbeat. That night, as they examined the records, The silvery vapor from the Kyoto jar materialized into vague shapes of human faces over the maps. Kenji explained that the missing scientists had injected lunar DNA into the flowers during the American occupation, attempting to create a biological surveillance network. But the moon responded, he murmured, showing a 1946 photo where the formation was clearly visible on a frozen lake. At dawn, Aiko noticed her hands began to glow with the same luminescence as the flowers. Kenji confessed he had planted one of the seeds in his arm years ago, merging his nervous system with the flower network. "They want to show us something," he said, pointing to the sky. "The formation is not a symbol. It's a portal." Meanwhile, 3 figures with flower brooches arrived at the greenhouse, armed with tranquilizer darts. Aiko ran into the field. The flowers closed in her path to block the pursuers. Kenji remained, shouting for her to follow the roots, now glowing beneath the snow, tracing a path to the sea. On the coast, Aiko found a cave whose walls were covered in bioluminescent moss identical to the petals. In the center, a pool of salt water reflected the moon, but its surface rippled as if something breathed beneath it. When she dove in, she saw thousands of underwater flowers growing towards the surface, each carrying a holographic image of a missing scientist. Emerging, she found an abandoned submarine with the secret society symbol painted on its bow. Inside, a locked compartment required a password, the coordinates of the lunar formation. Aiko entered the numbers from Kai's map, and the doors opened to a room with a single plant on a pedestal, its roots intertwined with electrical wires connected to a satellite on the ceiling. The flower opened, revealing a crystalline core that projected Kai's image, alive, in Nagasaki. "You must choose," he said, his voice distorted. "Let the moon speak, or silence it forever." Aiko held the crystal, feeling the pulse of all the plants around her converge into her body. Kenji appeared behind her, bleeding from his ears, and whispered, "They are here." Outside the cave, the sea began to bubble. Aiko spun the crystal in her hands. The blue veins in her arms pulsed in sync with the core. Kenji fell to his knees, his eyes white as a corpse, as the footsteps of the brooch men echoed through the submarine. "They want to control the network," he gasped. "But the plants, they only wanted to communicate." Kai emerged in the projection, now clearer, holding an envelope identical to the one Aiko received. "The formation on the moon is an invitation," he said, his voice clearer. "Or a warning." Aiko inserted the crystal into the satellite, and the submarine's walls became transparent, revealing the sea filled with aquatic flowers rising to the surface. The flowers formed a luminous tunnel to the moon, which now glowed with a greenish light. The men stormed the room, but the plants outside wrapped around the submarine, sealing the entrances. Kenji laughed, blood dripping down his neck, and ripped the wires from the satellite. "It's not a portal," he said. "It's a mirror. The moon shows us what we could be." An explosion rocked the submarine. Aiko ran to the entrance chamber, holding the crystal, as Kenji confronted the men. On the beach, she saw Kai running towards her, alive, followed by figures in Imperial Army uniforms. "Destroy the satellite," he shouted. "They will use the plants as weapons." Aiko hesitated, remembering the flowers in Kyoto, how their shadows told different stories depending on the light. In the last second, before Kai reached her, she threw the crystal into the subterranean pool. The water churned, and a white light enveloped everything. When the clarity subsided, the submarine and the men were gone, leaving only sand and gleaming shells. Kai, now with scars identical to Kenji's, explained that the moon sent a simple message: "Sic in caelo, ita in terra." As above, so below. Years later, in a Nagasaki public garden, Aiko watched children play near ordinary flower beds. Her hands still glowed faintly in the dark. At night, when the full moon rose, she sometimes saw shadows that weren't there, forming familiar patterns. Kai never reappeared, but anonymous letters arrived with stamps from Hokkaido, Okinawa, and even Berlin. Each contained a seed and a Latin phrase. In the last letter, a map of the solar system with the moon marked as the central node. Aiko planted the seed in a pot, and when the first petal sprouted, she knew the formation had never been a mystery to be solved, but a conversation to be continued.